I have a short version, which would be a half an hour, but I'm going to make it shorter so that everybody will be pleased. I chose to deal with the position of Father Alexander Schmemann on the question of apophatic rule, thinking, first of all, about his difference with Losky, Florovsky, Bulgakov, all of whom adhered to the Byzantine synthesis and culture. Also, because of Father Alexander's special mission to the Americas. In this sense, he's very important because he conceived or tried to think through how Orthodoxy, which it came from countries that are very organically Orthodox, Russia, the Byzantine world, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, how would they look in its celebration of the sacraments, even in their theology, to the Western world, and especially, of course, to the United States, because it is the dominant culture in the Western world, and its priorities and values are such that are very different than what the Orthodox, in principle, propose. But yet the Orthodox Church is a Catholic Church, and it must preach the gospel wherever it is, or she is, being the church. How then to think about it? This is, I think, a fundamental question that Schmemann raises, very fundamental. But for him, his answer or his response is very curious. The main problem for him is the Byzantine culture. It is certainly not the case of Losky, or of Florovsky, or Bulgakov. But it is a problem for Schmemann. And it's also interesting because Schmemann and Losky were Westerners. And they were very pleased to be Paris educated. And they both, in each way, had the intention to bring Orthodoxy to different kinds of people. Losky to the French culture, French Catholicism most immediately, in which he knew thoroughly, by the way, being a disciple of Etienne Gilson. But Father Alexander had another mission, going to the United States from St. Sergius to St. Vladimir, where he was dean for a long time. And in that sense, felt that he had to speak a different kind of theological language. And the difference basically is the following. Not in terms of the Palamite vision, or if you wish, the Byzantine theology that culminated in St. Gregory, but looking very closely, in which became actually his field of expertise, the liturgy. The true theology, Orthodox theology, is found in its liturgies. And from the first church, from the Apostolic Church, and then from the Patristic Church, but in the liturgies, and not, and the big point of division would be Dionysius, who was so appreciated by Losky, but so criticized by Schmemann. He would go into even the notion of theosis, which he uses, as a result not of an individual ascetic approximation to the divine, and the word used this morning, the renunciation of the world. I mean, that's the reason why, I mean, he's exaggerating here when it comes to Palamas, but anyway. But what is essential in him is that he really thinks the problem of Christianity, really, is, and especially it's the true church, the Orthodox Church, it is the Byzantine influence that fixed the liturgy in a certain form. And it affected all of this part of the world. And how do you then transpose this form to the New World? How to make it intelligible? It's a big task. For him, and the secret is here's where the apophatic instance comes, to look through the accretions of given unto the liturgy over the century, especially when it became the official church of the empire, right? And then go back as far as you could to what we call the first stratum, the three stratum. The stratum of the first church, pre-Nicene, the post-Nicene stratum, the cathedral celebrations of the liturgy, and the influence of the monastic liturgies. But the contact of the first stratum is particularly important because it's essentially impacted by the Jewish culture, not by the Hellenic, but essentially by the Jewish culture, which is not easy to divide, because Hellenization was very common, of course, in Palestine. But it is the Jewish temple worship that contains, back to the matrix, which he calls the ordo of the divine liturgy. And then also, another very important question, and it has to do certainly with a question raised up in the first conference, had nothing to do with the renunciation of the world. Rather, it had to do with the salvation of the world. And that's the reason why, at least twice in the liturgy, in the Pskov, and then in the Anaphora, we say, for the salvation of the world. It's not, the Lamb of God is taken, the life of the Lamb of God is taken away for the salvation and the life of the world. Again, on the night he was betrayed, or rather when he gave himself up for the life of the world. So there was a sense of time, the liturgy of time, that he thought was being compromised by a Platonic influence that the Byzantines, until Palamas, could not get rid of. But it was this fixed liturgy, that became the export of whom? Of the Russians, of the Romanians, of the Greeks, of perhaps even the Copts, when they went to the New World. This is the big issue. How can this be made intelligible to a different kind of people? So he has a lot to say, and I'm really going around my text. I'm not going to follow it because it will take too long. It will take half an hour, and that's too long. But he's aware of the challenges. He is not an ignorant man. On the contrary. And he saw in his journals that were posthumously published what the challenge was. He wrote this in 1978, but it really rings so true today in the West. Perhaps you don't feel it so much in Pskov, but you will feel it in Western Europe, and you will feel it even more in the United States of America, and even more in Canada. Okay? But here it is. It's a note. The West, secular, hedonistic, technological, etc., lives by its renunciation of what? Of Christianity. I emphasize not by indifference to Christianity, but precisely renunciation of the cause of happiness, economics, sex, abortion. The revolutionary West lives by its fight with Christianity, with the Christian man, Homo Christianus. The East is divided between Western renunciation and fight with the West under the sign of either revolution or Islam. Very prophetic. Very prophetic. Now, he also goes on in this part of his work to say, and this, I'll just read this very quickly because it only confirms what I said before. He says, Eastern Orthodoxy remains and cannot not remain foreign to the Western ways that are dominant in the world. The encounter with the West, the conversion of the West, can occur through contact with the Bible and the Eucharist, and in no way in contact with Byzantine mysteriology. Why the Bible and the Eucharist? Well, this is what the early church had for sure. The Bible with two testaments and the Eucharist, the key. And of course, those who know Schmeman's work know how much weight he gives to the Eucharist. The whole liturgy is Eucharistic, from the beginning to the end. And when you call people together in the synaxis, it is the beginning of the great thanksgiving. And it's a journey into God, Christ, participating in his body and blood. Theosis, practice over time, comes through that kind of participation in the sacramental life of the church. So he does avoid, and I mentioned here, Dionysius, and he goes on to say how bad it all is, and he goes on to say as well, how important it is to go to find the way through all of this in search of the ordo. I'll read this, at least this part, just to confirm what I said before, and to see how his negative thinking, to use the word, at least the English translation of what Losky's saying, negative attitude, apophatic attitude, which just runs through Losky's work, thoroughly, to find the ordo behind the rubrics, regulations, and rules, to find the unchanging principle, the living norm or logos of worship as a whole, within what is accidental and temporary. This is the primary task which faces those who regard liturgical theology not as collecting of accidental and arbitrary explanations of services, but as a systematic study of the lex orandi of the church. And so we have here something rather remarkable. Really, it is the church, by the way. A couple of ideas came along. For St. Gregory as well. I mean, the church as an ontological entity. It's not just an institution. It's a new reality that came, that was thought of from the beginning, and came with the saving acts of Christ, and especially his institution of the Eucharist. It is real. It is not an idea. And it is through the church and the sacraments of the church that we achieve deification for him. So so one of the things, of course, I'm practically summarizing a lot of things that I'm saying here, but you can understand how it is for him the important thing really is to enter into the mission in the New World through a careful practice, liturgical practice, that at the same time avoids what has been called recently orthodoxism. And this is what orthodoxism means. And believe me, in where I live in Portugal, and where I've lived actually more than half of my life, you can imagine what orthodoxy is like there. It's immigrant orthodoxy, and mostly Ukrainian. Okay, there are Romanians, Serbs, and Russians, but mostly Ukrainian. And you can imagine, and it's natural, that this the church represents to them home, the homeland, and the same in the United States. Although there are generations now, and in the United States and Canada, there's another different kind of dynamics, and much of which is owed to Schmemann. Not all of it, thank God. But I'm not in agreement. I'm just saying that. I'm trying to argue for his point, but not necessarily in agreement. But a lot of it is due to him. So what he eventually says, is that he said basically, listen, you Orthodox in America, you have to grow up. You are in a new country, You can't make this a club. You've got to preach the gospel and be a witness to the true church. So this is what he says. But our claim is that our church is Orthodox, or simply the church. And this is a frightening claim, but it implies that it is the faith for all men, for all centuries, for all cultures. And unless this implication is kept in mind and heart, our claim to be the true all-Orthodox Church becomes an hypocrisy. And how recurrent this is, by the way. And would be more honest to call ourselves a society for the perpetuation of the cultural values of a particular region of the world. It's very well. Now, what's his remedy? That we remember who we are. Though conceptually unknowable to him, the Orthodox carries, this is what he is proposing, with him wherever he is, the conviction that while societies change, human nature and its condition represent the constant yearning for wholeness. It is to be expected that worldly forces will militate against this vision. These matters related to our sinfulness, nevertheless, the quest for righteousness persists, given we are qua persons, worshipping beings, homo adorans. For the Orthodox, this has a transcendental status that is ontologically prior. Let's get it. Sure. 1 minute. Ontologically prior to any purely historical positioning within the given society. So that's the basic thesis. I mean, there's more. You can understand now where the strength of this is, though. I mean, there's a lot that is wrong with the thesis, especially the simplification of Byzantium. The Hellenic mind had a wonderful way of going beyond itself and transforming itself. I think the example of St. Gregory Palamas is where it happened with most happily. Anyway. But in many other ways, he's very right. There is also the constant threat of orthodoxism, and there is also forgetfulness of the Bible. It's very chronic that Orthodox do not know the Bible. Chronic. That's basically it. I mean, I could go on, and I have to have luck. I have luck to witness too, because I've been there. But the idea, of course, is that it's the strength of our liturgy that is our strength and our bond beyond all jurisdictions. Because I am under the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople. For that reason, I cannot communicate with you. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that a good sign of our Christianity? Right? So you well. Now, I don't think there's anything really, as I read Lofsky, and I made a point, I said in July to Professor Orlick that I haven't read Lofsky, but I've read him since then. Nothing in Lofsky offends what is really important in Schmemann. Really important. Not really. And I think that but the question though remains, how much attention we should give to the sacramental life of the Church, and the Church herself as the locus of our communion, and also our deification, because we are not saved alone. We are saved as the body of Christ. So with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.